All right. Speaking of their panic, let's see what else they are getting into, because this was another interesting one. Never let a crisis go to waste. The hurricanes have come and gone. The damage remains. And now the Democrats want a bunch of money and they want a bunch of resources from the federal government in order to reconstruct the electoral systems to serve them. Very convenient. Now, you'll see here we've got several letters. This one is from Congress, a bunch of Democratic congresspeople, including Grijalva, Maxine Waters, Ro Khanna, lots of them, sending this in. Dan Goldman. Oh, gosh. You know how bad it is if his name's on here. So it's going over to the Biden White House. Alejandro, Jake Sullivan. He went to Oxford. He's super smart. And the FEMA agency, they say we need a bunch of stuff. And we're going to come back and zoom in on this. But they also want print on demand ballot systems to ensure that displaced voters receive and cast their ballots. They want mobile voting units so that they can send out these devices, $250,000 a unit, $250,000 a pop, so that they can go to areas destroyed by the hospitals, by the hurricanes, setting up hospitals and things. So they want a lot of stuff. Okay, we're going to read through this, come back to what they're asking for. But this is the person who launched this. It is a press release. She's from Georgia, Fannyland. She led a group of lawmakers sending 2 urgent letters. Okay, it's going to the entire Biden administration, which is like going to be happy to implement this stuff. And they're also sending letters to the Postal Service, the USPS. Isn't that convenient too? So that when they get red Republican ballots, they can just shred them. Now, they call for immediate federal action to ensure that the elections remain safe and accessible in the wake of the hurricanes that have come. Now, the letter emphasizes the urgent need for both timely information sharing from the Postal Service and logistical support and emergency resources in the 6 states, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Man, it'd be really nice for them to pick up North Carolina and Georgia. And if they got Florida somehow, that's the game. They say, given the widespread devastation, it's essential that the U.S. Postal Service operations be restored as swiftly as possible and that voters are fully informed about how to access their mail. It gives us a list of the impacted zip codes. Now, the second letter that we'll read went through to a bunch of people in the Biden administration. They want an extra $500,000 to each state's election offices, saying the funding is critical to making sure that people are not displaced. Look at all these members who signed it. That's a lot. The one that went to the White House signed by similarly a lot of people. And the lawmakers have requested funding be made available the next 10 days. Voting's already underway. Critical deadlines. And so the White House National Security Council and Homeland and FEMA should prioritize these emergency funds to fix our elections, right? So you see where this is going. Here's the letter from a bunch of Congress people over to the White House. We've got Salinas, Scott, Fernandez, Jayapal's on there. Mark's there, Pecan, Lynch, Frankel, Neckel, Scott, Costa, Kasten, Balint, McCormick, Correa, Huffman, Ivy, Grijalva, Norton, Ro Khanna, Jasmine Crockett, Fulla, Maxine Waters, Danny Davis, Mullen Ramirez, Sherry, and Dan Goldman. Oh my gosh, look at them. There's a lot of them. Williams, Adams, Espiliot. Okay, Hank Johnson, Mr. Capsize. Guam's going to capsize. He's on the list. This is a really serious letter. We don't want Florida or North Carolina to capsize. So hopefully somebody's on top of this. Oh, Jake Sullivan's getting a letter. He's very smart. We are writing to urgently request emergency funding to support the elections impacted by the hurricanes. The storms have wrecked a bunch of states and they threaten the integrity of the upcoming November elections. Now, the situation is dire, they say. Already, more than 16 million eligible voters in 75 counties have been impacted by Hurricane Helene. In North Carolina alone, and Milton now, Hurricane Helene forced the closure of a majority of Western county election offices, and Florida's Charlotte County has flooded. And additional polling locations are also unusable, and mail delivery has been suspended in multiple zip codes, halted ballot and voter registration form delivery. Upstate South Carolina and Georgia are facing widespread power outages. The issues are compounded by personal losses suffered by individual election workers, many of whom are still trying to locate loved ones. Is that right? I thought they said everything was like perfect over there. But to address these, They want 500 grand in emergency money, and it's crucial for this. Now, that 500 grand is not going to go that far. They wanted to deploy mobile voting units at 250 per unit. That's 2 units per state. That's it. So they're going to need a lot more money than that. Unfortunately, Ukraine has it, as do the illegals. So they also want to deploy mobile voting units, right, at different locations. They want to establish print-on-demand ballot systems to ensure that displaced voters can cast their ballots, probably showing up without ID. That's an interesting one. Providing hazard pay to existing poll workers, strengthening communications through radios to talk and communicate about these things, addressing ballot damage and delivery disruptions, consolidating and relocating polling places due to facility damage and ongoing water disruptions, replacing voting equipment damaged by the water. Just replace the equipment with the machines from Democrats Are Us. Supplying generators and satellite connectivity. Now, the initial allocation, right? So just give us a little bit of money right now. We'll need a lot more. However, we anticipate, there it is. I was waiting for it. Where's the real money? $500,000? Come on. We think that the full recovery efforts will exceed 80 million. And we need that money because the election's like in 3 weeks. It is imperative that this funding be made available within the next 10 days. Voting's already underway. Critical deadlines are rapidly approaching. And so we call on the executive branch, particularly the National Security Council, Homeland Security, FEMA, to immediately prioritize these emergency funds so that we can start creating all this infrastructure. We propose that this funding be allocated through FEMA. We understand the local election offices are navigating their own challenges. This request is a temporary measure to ensure that there are no delays to limit voting. The requested funding will enable the immediate deployment of emergency support to election offices to allow them to serve the voters. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Debbie Dingle also signed off on it. So a bunch of money that they would like to inject into the systems in order to create these infrastructure changes. And I want to be cognizant of the fact that, yeah, there was tremendous damage that went through that entire region. 2 hurricanes back to back. And I've seen the footage and the damage, and it's horrendous and horrific. And we pray for those people who've been damaged and impacted and killed by this thing, and pray that they have a speedy recovery on this. I'm positive that there are going to be necessary remediations to facilitate an election. Not doubting that at all. And I hope that the people who are legitimate actually do get the opportunity and the right to vote, and do vote hard. But when you see Democrats come in and bundle themselves up into these little groups, these people are not interested in free and fair elections at all. They want Trump removed from ballots. They want him in jail because he's a threat to their power. So you can't trust Dan Goldman. I just want to make sure every voter gets the right to vote. No. There's something else obviously happening here. They're using this to use federal money, $80 million, to get out the vote for their party and to manipulate the infrastructure of the elections to bend it to their will. Now, it's not just that money from the federal government. Democrats are also sending letters to the Postal Service, the people who actually pick up the ballots and then put the red ones in the shredder. You see a bunch of the same people here. Goldman's on this. Moskowitz is on this. Maxine Waters is back. Jasmine Crockett. Grijalva's back on the list. A bunch of them, right? Frankel's here. So they're all signing on this one again to rig the Postal Service. They say, all right, hey, the U.S. Postal Service, the hurricanes are going to impact your jobs. With 2024 rapidly approaching, currently, there's problems in these affected areas. Already more than 16 million eligible voters have been impacted, and we expect it to increase once we learn more about the damage. Now, due to service disruptions, and we've got concerns about that too, because what if there's just bundles of ballots that are lost somewhere that nobody ever finds because the roads have been washed out? According to U.S., or that's the excuse rather, I don't know what happened to those things. Mail delivery has been suspended. Temporary relocation sites have not been identified. Additionally, many election offices are temporarily closed for 30 days or more. Impacts a bunch of people, and we need to have these things delivered. It impacts both election mail that's already been completed and postmarked, like absentee ballots and voter registration forms, which need to be delivered to election offices. election mail that needs to be sent to voters, and other time-sensitive materials. And so to ensure that every eligible voter who wishes to register and cast a ballot is actually served, the Postal Service must immediately provide a public, comprehensive list of zip codes impacted by the service disruptions. And then they can match those with their voter registration databases and then decide which to prioritize for their get out the vote operations so they can cross-reference the buckets, along with details on where the mail from these areas is being rerouted or held and what's been happening following the disaster. So it should look like this: impacted zip codes and temporary mail locations. Now, while full operations may be limited as recovery occurs, the Postal Service must prioritize election mail to prevent inadvertent disenfranchisement. Now, currently, the Postal Service's residential service disruption site lists the 3-digit zip codes and location of post offices where all the operations are suspended. However, for some offices, temporary relocations have been announced, while many others remain closed. For instance, reports indicate that the mail has not yet provided consistent information on where the election-related mail is being held or rerouted. Where is it going? I don't know. Very confusing. Leaving many voters and election officials uncertain about the status of these materials. So they're trying to track down where they can inject into the process. It's always the opposite. Now, furthermore, in a recent update, NCSBE, North Carolina State Board of Elections, outlined measures that are being taken, and we read through their updates. Now, with this in mind, in North Carolina, they approved a bunch of stuff, like they're going to be commingling a bunch of resources across the state. So usually it's a county-specific thing, but the counties have been impacted, and so the rule changes now opened it up. So the non-impacted counties can send people over to the impacted counties, and the state can take a lot more control as well. But with this in mind, we respectfully request that the Postal Service provide answers to the following things. When will the alternate sites become available for this election? How will USPS communicate the location of these sites? When do they anticipate being able to post this information? Will USPS commit to running radio public service announcements so that people know where to go? What steps will you take in prioritizing the timely delivering of election mail to both voters and others? Please let us know. Contact us if you need information. Signed, your Democrat friends, the biggest cheaters in the whole country. So I'm sure they're working very hard with the Postal Service and FEMA. They need $80 million. And I wanted to just point this out because $80 million is a ton of money, obviously. But in the federal scope of things, it's like nothing. It's not that much at all. In fact, a ton of FEMA money has gone to COVID. $4.9 billion, almost $5 billion went to COVID in 1 month, which is 20 times more than Hurricane Helene got. And so the fake COVID money, and this was last month, by the way, they budgeted 20 times more cash to COVID last month. Official documents reveal that FEMA set aside $4.9 billion in coronavirus aid in September, although the panic was officially declared over a year ago. The figure was in contrast to the $210 million initially allocated for North Carolina. Our own people are just like peasants. Where did this money go? COVID money in September 24? The death toll for Hurricane Helene, it's from FEMA, currently stands at more than 200. It comes as the agency faces the dual challenges of funding two hurricanes. A recent report found that FEMA, quote, has challenges calculating and reporting the consistent and accurate timeframes for hiring. It identified staff burnout, partly triggered by COVID. Okay. According to official documents that the Telegraph got their hands on, FEMA made around $20 billion available for its response to COVID in 2024. It represents about 40% of the entire outlay for the agency. They get $47 billion a year, and they give like a pittance to us. Of course, they're going to say that, oh, that COVID money went to whatever. COVID money? Coronavirus was the first public health emergency that they were tasked with assisting on, and they used its fund to cover jabs, PPE, funeral assistance. Yeah. And they did a terrible job managing that. We had some of the worst outcomes on the globe. On Monday, the agency said its spending on the response to Hurricane Helene had just passed $210 million. Wow, amazing. It's like, thanks. Thanks for taking us to the dollar store, government. It then emerged that the agency had only 9% of the staff available. You get one thing at the dollar store. Here you go. The agency is facing staff shortages for a myriad of reasons, including a number of workers quitting after being burnt out. During the last 5 years, 15% of the staff have been made available for hurricanes. All right, it's a disaster. Our government is just absolutely useless. But the Democrats never let a crisis go to waste. And so, under the guise of trying to make sure elections are not disenfranchising anybody, they're going to need $80 million. They're going to need all the data from the Postal Service. And they're going to work very hard to try to adjust the infrastructure in these very important states for them. Georgia, they really need to win that. North Carolina is the same because the map is not favoring Kamala based on the most recent numbers. So what do the Democrats do? They spring into action, try to commandeer the process so that they can secure victory at all costs. But that's Democrats for you. That's what they do.